Dear Stefan, we're continuing our conversation about the Mongol expansion, the Mongol invasions, the Mongol realm, and this time we are going to talk about the northern borders of the Mongol Empire. Why Mongol Empire didn't expand to Novgorod, for instance? What was the reason they stopped to a certain climate type?
I feel like, well, in the case of Novgorod, we actually know that they were stopped by the swamp,
Yeah.
boggy conditions, but they had come within 30 kilometers of it, or 50. So that was a lucky chance of fate, but they didn't stop the conquest of Novgorod because they
Of course.
had their census takers in Alexander Nevsky's city collecting the census of the population, well recorded in the Novgorod Chronicle. And that means that the Novgorodians became taxpayers
Absolutely.
of the Mongol Empire. So they were only delayed in conquering. And I think this is a useful point. Novgorod's a great start to think of this topic and how we can reconsider something that's long been sort of taken as taken for granted in the Mongol Empire, which is that we often imagine they didn't go to the north. Their conquests were to the west, the south, the east, but not to the north. But I think we have to reconsider this. And there's a lot of evidence in support of that.
So what evidence says about that? The climate in the northern part of Eurasia was very inhospitable. We're talking about tundra, and we're talking about territories without massive tracts of grassland which they needed for their cavalry.
Yes, but there was still something useful to be found in those places. So, the Permian people, for instance, these are more north situated people than Novgorodians and the Ugra people.
Yeah.
We know that they were under the Mongol occupation by early 1250s, because William of Rubric, a Belgian Franciscan friar, who was acting as an unofficial emissary of Louis IX of France, he went to Mongolia and he wrote actually a delightfully detailed account of all the things he encountered. And at the end of the book, he apologized. He said, "Sorry, I put in so many details, but it's really useful to us now because it makes that world come alive of the 1250s Mongol Empire." And as he was passing through basically Russia or someplace like this, he found out that the Mongols owned and had conquered all the people north of Russia, the Ugrians, the Permians, right to the Arctic Ocean. And William of Rubric, having these old medieval fantasy story misconceptions, he said, "Are the people up there monsters, like we say?" And the Mongols said, "No, they're not monsters, but they're not rich. So we just
exactly.
We don't tax them the same way as we."
Of course.
Yeah, we just put them to work. And I think this story, you cannot make this up unless this really happened. This is not just some fantasy of Rubric, and it's not a lie by the Mongols. This is a true story. They conquered these Arctic Ocean people, and then they realized, well, they don't really have anything to give us, unlike the Caliphate or something. So let's just get them working. Now, that also happened on the eastern end of Asia, Kamchatka.
Yeah.
Very little known details, but Christopher Atwood looked at these. The Mongols moved up to Kamchatka and established a base there. And again, they put the people to work. And this was already happening in Ogadai Khan, the second Khan's time. Like the 1230s, they're invading Kamchatka, which is far north of where the border of the Mongol Empire ordinarily gets drawn. If you just
Yeah,
look in an encyclopedia or Wikipedia, look at the
absolutely.
Mongol Empire. Yeah,
It goes a little northern than the lake Baikal, for instance.
exactly. That's what it seems to be the standard
Map.
kind of marker,
Yeah,
geographical marker. It's used the Lake Baikal, and this is where the Mongols stopped. But there's no this is kind of an assumption of modern historians because we say, well, it's so cold up there, the Mongols wouldn't have. But the little written evidence we have is saying they were going up there. And here's an intriguing one that suggests they really must have been going up to the north. They, in the Yuanxi, there's a record of how short the nighttime is in the summer in the Arctic region. They say about as long as it takes you to cook a pig. The sun goes down and comes up again. And this is so they were making observations about the very short nighttime in the summer and the very long nighttime in the winter. And how do you make these observations unless you're actually going up there? So they were going up.
of course.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, go
here's
ahead.
a reason they might have done the gear falcons. Marco Polo mentions they would go to the nesting sites of falcons. Mongols would, and they'd collect the nestling birds when they're still young, so they can still be kind of tamed and turned into hunting birds, which are very sought after, valuable products to these Mongol rulers and nobility. Like a very good falcon or eagle, this is a sort of luxury pet and a
Exactly.
symbol of your nobility.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
like a status symbol.
yeah. And so it turns out we know now, we know as a fact that eagles or peregrine falcons, for instance, actually do nest on these islands in the Arctic Ocean. So north of the mainland of Siberia. So that alone would be a good reason for Mongols to go up there. Now, someone could say, well, yeah, but do the Mongols claim ownership of that land? Or do they just go up there to get valuable commodities? Because it's so cold there, it's not like they happily live there or something. But they did claim ownership of that territory, just as they claimed ownership of the whole world. And if there was nobody contesting their claim, or very few people, I mean, we can legitimately imagine a lot of these northern, even up to the Arctic Ocean, northern regions were actually part of the Mongol Empire. They economically exploit them, they freely move through them, and they claim ownership of them. Well, that's they're already doing at least everything Canada is doing to claim ownership of a lot of uninhabited islands in Canada, and we draw that as the map of Canada.
Of course.
You know, yeah. So I think you could make a legitimate case that the Mongols really did own a lot of this stuff, especially if they said they did and actually went to these places.
For how long they controlled these northern areas? Because we know that in 1207, Genghis Khan had a campaign against so-called forest people. Forest people were they inhabited some of these wastelands in the north. They lived in taiga.
Yeah. So it's not entirely clear. Marco Polo offers a few suggestions that the Mongols didn't totally occupy these very far north Siberian places. Rather, they would actually just go up and rob the local people, but then come back down to more Mongol friendly landscapes. So I don't know if you'd call that ownership. But basically, when they invaded Europe, it's always disregarded, but several contemporary European documents say they have three armies. One's attacking Hungary, one's attacking Poland, and one's going way, way up to the north and just attacking like Finland and places north of the route. People dismiss it because we don't have a lot of writings from those regions. For instance, the Permians and Ugrians who lived on the Arctic Ocean.
I mean, we know that
Leave any records
yeah,
behind. They weren't a
we don't
literary
have,
culture, or if they had any,
yeah.
they sure haven't survived. So it's easy to just dismiss this information. But when you put it all together, there are repeated references. So, for instance, William of Rubric in the 1250s, he says that the Mongols have conquered all the northern peoples in the northwest part of Eurasia. And then in 1241, we have records that say one of their major armies is going up to the Arctic Ocean.
I mean, at least they use them as a free labor or a slave labor. They realize
exactly.
that in the north they don't have a sophisticated civilization, sophisticated cities, and countries, but they utilize what was available there. And in case of northern territories, they can only take a slave labor, since people there were very poor and underdeveloped, unlike kingdoms in Europe or Middle East, where they got checked in 1260s by Mamluks, and in the second campaign that we mentioned in 1285, 86, they were also checked in Hungary, because Hungarians, meanwhile, learned how to defend against the Mongol cavalry, and they prepared themselves much better than during the first invasion.
Yes, and there's certain stories that John of Plano Carpini tells about going to the north too, and that the Mongols encountered people with ox feet. And here's my theory about that. Those were horseshoes. No, not horseshoes, snowshoes. They had snowshoes on.
Yes, of course.
And to an outsider, they would just see this broad-looking thing around their foot, and it could just become a legend. Like they had in the far northern reaches, they have ox feet. These legends found in Chinese sources 100 years, 200, 300 years earlier. So, and you have a European guy saying, yeah, he went up to the Mongols went up to the land of the Oxfeet people. And I just think it's snowshoes myself. There's other stories about a wolf people, like the men are wolves. Well,
this sounds scary, like some kind of a horror film on werewolves.
And a lot of people, when they read this stuff, they put it all back on Europe. They say, oh, these are European legends and misconceptions.
Yeah.
But the Mongols and Chinese actually have stories like this too, but they seem to be based on something. So, for instance, in the very far north, like Finland, Norway, right around the year 1200, there's a book from that region called the Volsunga Saga about Sigurd, or this hero. It's just old myths, but it tells of people who would dress up as wolves and pretend to change into wolves, and they were sort of dangerous murderers and robbers. And the whole opening section of the story is about these guys, murderers who put on wolf skins. And I'm like, well, what if the Mongols encountered people like that who impersonate wolves and put on wolf skins to sort of terrify invaders? This is highly speculative, but you have a 1200s Norwegian document that's saying something about people who dress up and impersonate wolves in that region. And then Carpini says the Mongols claim they went up and there were wolf people, and I just there's these little tantalizing matching elements from very different sources.
In the Northern Europe and also in the Balkans, the wolf is a secret animal, and the cult of wolf is very popular, especially in pagan times. And the myths on werewolves are also popular tradition in Northern and Central Europe. In modern day,
Less
in modern day cinematography, they always collide wolves with vampires. Vampires are the epitome of aristocracy and all kinds of oppressive classes, while werewolves are more of a working class type of monsters or creatures.
So speaking of working class, there's another good reason that the Mongols would go up to the far north, even though yes, it's cold and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We know that they set up in East Asia. They set up an ivory industry because ivory was a very,
of course, it was a commodity
sought after by the Mongols. It was
of course.
useful for certain things, including they believed that a kind of piece of walrus tooth or narwhal tooth could be used to detect poison. And everyone, of course, was trying to poison each other back in the Mongol empires. This was valuable, but just as a nice material for carving, ivory was great. So that was kind of, again, on the other side of northern Eurasia. You can tell that the Mongols were putting people to slave labor, just like we hear that they were doing on the western side. So the people might not have that much, but they get them to work capturing narwhals, walruses, and basically producing an ivory industry for the Mongol Empire. And that's not a speculation, that is documented. And I have a very tantalizing thing that I've never told anyone, so this is a first for us. The very last Inuit migrations happened somewhere around the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. There's this very last major Tole people migration. And they just seem to be trying to get away from Siberia as far as they can and as fast as they can. Some of them just rush all the way to Greenland. And I just wonder, were these the slave workers of the Mongol ivory industry who just basically they didn't like the Mongols coming into their territory? Because if so, they fought against the local people in northern Canada and Greenland. And that would make the Mongol Empire conquests the first truly world war happening on multiple fronts in a sort of.
I mean, we have a reference about the Khanate of Siberia in Ryasanovsky's History of Russia from 1999, and the Khanate of Siberia stretched to territories on the northern part of Eurasia.
Yes, the Khanate of Siberia, indeed.
The Khanate of Siberia, yeah.
They held out until maybe the late 1500s. Ivan the Terrible started to finally, and it was only, I think, because of guns. Guns really changed the balance of power that had existed between the Rus and the nomads. Had always been able to hold their own, but this gun weaponry started to finally turn it in the Rus' favor. So they aggressively went into Siberia.
But this is how the Russification of Siberia started.
State, the Khanate of Siberia. And the truth is, we don't know how far north the these states really had their power and influence. We know more from the cultures that write stuff down, and they're in the south.
Yeah.
But the truth is, what would stop the Mongols from exploiting everything they could, all the resources of the north? Because there are very valuable things: ivory, peregrine falcons, and we know that Novgorod exploited these Ugrian and Permian people. We know Muslim traders from the Islamic geography writers of the Abbasid Golden Age. They would go up there. They would go up to the Ugrians and the Arctic Ocean and describe the people and trade with them. And the Russians actually extorted them. The Novgorodians forced the Ugrians and Permians to pay them tribute, and they had forts to kind of enforce their rule before the Mongol conquest. So why would the Mongols come into that area and not also do what these Muslim traders for centuries and Rus traders and bureaucrats had been doing for centuries? I think they would have, because the Mongols were very determined to just get their hands in every potential economic,
every lucrative business. Of course, they like to have control of lucrative businesses. And how can we judge inhabitants of Novgorod state, Kievan Rus, with modern day people who live there, modern day Ukrainians and modern day Russians?
Well, they have some stories. The Russians have some stories of, for instance, a Tatar hero who lived in the name of the place escapes me, but it is very, very far north in Russia.
Yeah.
Getting to the Arctic Circle, kind of.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was a famous Tatar hero that lived there. So there's little legends like that hint that they really had gone up there. But for me, it's very simple. Why would William of Rubric make up that the Mongols told him there's no monsters up in the north, that there's just very desperately poor people who are used as slave labor now by the Mongols? And actually, there's, again, Muslim traders used to go far into the north to what they call the land of darkness, because the sun didn't shine in the winter. And they would take take sleds pulled by dogs and go way up to the north with local guides. And they said that the people there were so hungry that they would boil bones over and over again. Al-Umari, a Syrian writer of the Mongol era, the Permian people will just boil the bone over and over again and drink the broth just to get any little vitamin, calories out of it. And that's a byword of their hunger. And the Mongols said, yes, these people are hungry. They don't have a lot, but the hunger of the Arctic people was famous for centuries before the Mongol Empire.
And we have so many cases of cannibalism amongst them.
Yeah, because cannibalism seems to often stem from just a society that had food scarcity. It's not so much lifestyle choice or something. It's more something.
They had the scarce food.
So when you just put it all together, Marco Polo statements, the Chinese sources, I don't see, especially if the Mongols claimed ownership of that territory, and if nobody's really challenging their claims to that territory.
True.
The other problem is it seems like the way we draw the Mongol northern border is just some kind of tradition that started out of nowhere. It's not really based on anything. Like the way we draw the southern, western, and eastern borders of the Mongol Empire is based on, the primary sources.
Primary sources, of course. We have plenty of sources for these borders. True.
The north, we don't have that. So we don't know exactly what was going on. But there's, if you had to guess, there's stronger evidence that the Mongols were active and conquering the north, whereas there's not. There's more evidence of that than against it.
Because
But
their
it's just
power
a-
wasn't their power wasn't challenged by any organized state or organized army on the north. While they had serious problems in other directions, in the west, south, and east.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't dealing with as huge populations. They weren't. They were dealing with societies that were struggling to survive at a subsistence level, who probably just a handful of Mongols, a detachment of them could show up
Yeah,
in one of these Arctic villages and say, "You have to pay us now," and they would just say, "Okay, we have to." But I do find it interesting that the Inuit, there's a major migration of
yeah.
Inuit around this time.
Did they colonize? Did they colonize
So maybe some people
these territories?
decided great and go to
Yeah.
America. They
Did
did.
Mongols?
It was full.
Sorry. Did
It
Mongols
was
colonize these
colonial.
wastelands? Because you said
Yeah,
that they had a colony in Kamchatka.
yeah, and how is that any different from the Russian colonization where they had these little forts,
Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
like the trail of forts?
True.
That it sounds very similar. If they're establishing a fort on Kamchatka, if the Mongols were establishing a fort on Kamchatka Peninsula, that means they want to set up a military presence
Absolutely.
to control the local people. Unfortunately, the sources are just so scarce. The details are so scarce about these things. But we have enough evidence to for sure know that in the former homeland of like the Inuit, they're
Mhm.
still called the Russian Eskimo.
Yeah.
These people were subdued and colonized by the Mongol Empire and turned into basically an economic ivory production site. So I just find it very interesting that the Inuit, the last migrations of the Inuit occur roughly in that time. And that the Inuit were extremely aggressive to the people in North America that they came across. It seems like maybe this wasn't just a casual migration or something. They
Yeah.
may have been propelled, running from something kind of, and were just determined to get a new homeland far away and destroy anyone who was in their way, sort of. So, but again, that's just, I gotta look into this all more. It could be just a coincidence,
Of course.
but I can tell you that the colonialism that the Mongols were doing in that region of the world is actually well documented in Chinese sources, Mongol Chinese sources. There's
I'll send you.
another.
Yep. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'll wait.
I'll send you another link so we can continue because now it's going to.
Okay.
This link is going to expire in one minute. So I'll send you another one.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Now we're starting the second session, and we'll discuss about some of sources from that period that you mentioned.
Okay, they shed light on the Mongol attitude towards the north that supports this viewpoint that they really were conquering far north of Mongolia. Because in 1235 we have Juvayni, the governor of Baghdad, and he wrote a history, really good long history about the Mongol Empire, and he was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And he, when describing 1235 and the plans of the Mongols under Ogadai Khan, the second Khan,
yeah,
he wrote, quote, "Thereupon, each of the princes and noyans, military commanders, was designated a different campaign, and they were dispatched to the east and the west, the south and the north." So they're in Mongolia, and there's a record of campaigns to the north. And we have surprisingly a source by a rabbi in Belgium, which is not well known or discussed yet. But this guy was present for the interrogation of a Mongol prisoner taken in the 1241 campaign. And this prisoner was sent all the way to Belgium, and not to the Hague. They didn't have the Hague International Tribunal yet, but he wrote, he gives a name of a Mongol commander who's going to the north. He says, Gorboa is one of their other kings, and he goes through all the lands to the north to destroy everything he finds, as the others do. So this was a character named Abraham, who left behind a account of the Mongol prisoner. The Mongol prisoner was actually a Kipchak, by the way, but he worked for the Mongols, and he told where each of their armies was going, and he describes this Gorboa guy. I don't know who it is, but he was going north to destroy everything he finds, as the others do. So it's very interesting in light of the Giovanni in 1235, and then we have a prisoner statement in 1241, that when the papal emissaries were sent out to Mongolia, the most famous is John of Plano Carpini. He was an Italian. He went on behalf of the Pope. He came to Mongolia, and he saw the coronation ceremony of Guyak Khan, the third Khan, Ogadai's son. And he said for 4 days they did this ritual. All the chief people of the Mongols, all the great leaders, all wore blue one day, and then they wore red one day, and then they wore white one day, and then they wore brocade, and then the Khan was enthroned.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what brocade is, but I can tell you the Turkic Mongol direction system was used colors, because they didn't have like the abstract concept of south, north, east, west. So they used colors to say that. Mm-hmm. And south was red, white was west, and blue was east. Still the Eastern Mongols are called the Kuk Mongols, the Blue Mongols.
Yeah.
So whatever brocade is, if there's 4 of these, and 3 of them perfectly match the Turkic Mongol direction system, if brocade was black, which it probably was, then that was north. So they symbolize their ideology wearing these clothes. They're saying we're conquering south, east, south, west, north. I think because it was 4 days of this clothing ceremony. It's frustrating that the 4th color isn't described. It's just called brocade, but maybe it was understood by a medieval audience.
Yeah.
And I would add that the motivations for the Mongols to go north, they have some really good economic incentives. They have this ivory, the trade of which is already documented, running from, the Arctic Circle around Scandinavia through Volga, Bulgaria, but also the ivory trade right up to Kamchatka. And the Mongols would have wanted to control that. There's the fur trade. The furs of this region could at least be very valuable, just like Russians were forced to give furs to the Mongols. But then you also have the nesting grounds of the exotic hunting birds up in that really we know now as a scientific fact. They go up to these islands in the very far north. So just those 3 things could have been an incentive for the Mongols to not overlook the north, even if they didn't like to permanently inhabit it. And then also just recently, archaeologically, a mummy who's thought to date from 1280s was found in the Ob River basin. And this is really remote Siberia, right in the middle of Siberia. 1280s, so it's the Mongol period, and he has Persian materials. He's buried with Persian things, which would mean the trade went both ways, and that this guy from the Ob River, which is just as deep in Siberia as it gets, he was connected to the larger Asian trade system. And then the last thing I want to say before I forget is just that people have a urge to explore that's actually quite astounding when you realize how far people went. Adam of Bremen in Germany in the 1000s, he described this character named Harald Hardrada and how he sailed beyond Greenland and he got to this very mysterious country where the local people attacked him. And I wonder, maybe it was Baffin Island. So we might already have people in the 1000s who were going to North America from Europe. There was a Punic explorer in ancient times who circumnavigated Africa. This is all a little bit off topic, but it just goes to show you that people, even if it's not recorded, they tend to go far and wide. And there are some people, traders and whatnot, who've washed off course and they've gone to amazing places. So it really shouldn't surprise us that the Mongols would have dared to go even to the Arctic Ocean.
What about papal missions? Did they dare to go to the Mongol realm? And we all know that, not all of us, of course, but some of us know that the idea of the Roman Catholic Church was to convert Mongols into Roman Catholicism and use them as a fist, as a power, military power, to expand the influence of the Roman Catholic Church and to have a very powerful empire at that time, probably the most powerful empire at that period, on their side. So how many Catholic missions were sent during 13th and 14th century?
Yeah, so the main reason that the Pope sent these missions out was because the Mongols attacked Europe in 1241-42, inflicted this devastating slaughter on a lot of Eastern Europe, Poland, Moravia, Hungary, Bulgaria. So at that point, I think the Pope thought we have to confront these people. On the surface, he wrote letters that urged the Mongols to convert to Catholicism.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say how serious or realistic that proposal was, because these letters, even though they urged the Mongols to convert to Catholicism, they're quite aggressive and harsh. They say, like, how dare you? How did you dare to kill all these people in Europe? And desist at once. We demand that you desist at once. So it would be kind of amazing to me if the Mongols read a letter like that and said, okay, yeah, we'll convert to Catholicism. So it's hard to say how serious the Catholicism conversion effort was, or if this was more just a threat to the Mongols. The Europeans were just saying, and by the way, convert to our religion, just as a way of intimidating the Mongols or something. But it didn't work in any case. There were 4 missions that the Pope Innocent IV sent in the mid-1240s. One of them, headed by a guy named John of Portugal, it seems it never happened. Just, he didn't take off on his journey for some reason. So that one didn't work. So we're down to 3 missions. One went directly to Mongolia, and that was headed by John of Plano Carpini. And he was quite a shrewd diplomat. Like he knew how to not make the Mongols mad. They demanded any foreign emissary kneel down to talk to Batu or Goya Khan, and he just did it. He didn't make a big deal about it. He said, I'm not going to let this get in the way of the mission. So he successfully got to Mongolia. And not only did he witness that coronation of Goya Khan in 1246, but he got to know a lot of people from all around Asia. He got to know that the Rus princes like Yaroslav, the father of Alexander Nevsky. He found out about the world, asked all kinds of questions about geography, and he personally met with Guya Khan, and left a kind of vivid description of him. He said that the third Khan of the Mongol Empire looked about in his 40s, smart, and he said he never laughed, he never smiled, not even once, and just a dead serious guy. And Carpini and him would personally talk, and Goyuk said, "I'm going to come back to Europe and annihilate it this time, and we're going to fight for 30 years." But he mentioned the first target would be Livonia, which is Latvia, which is quite surprising. Prussia and Latvia were his first target. So I don't know what those guys had done to tick him off. But again, suggests that maybe their army had gone to the north and had past experience with that. Lithuania, Livonia, Prussia. A lot of sources talk about that. So that Goyuk was very determined to strike Livonia, punish them for something happened up there. There was another, so that was the Franciscan mission of John of Plano Carpini. It returned back to Europe. They wrote three very valuable reports based on that expedition. And it was a major point in history, a big paradigm shift, because Europeans didn't know much about the world beyond Russia. They knew just only what ancient books said. And these ancient books would make mistakes all the time. They'd say the Caspian Sea was a part of the ocean. But these guys personally went and investigated the whole of Eurasia, and then survived, got back to Europe, and spread this knowledge. So there was now much more interest in the outside world than had been in Europe before. I mean, Europeans did get around before. They went on the Crusades, what have you. I just mentioned in the 1000s, there were Viking explorers, but this was a different sort of thing, a connection between Europe and East Asia that had never really happened at this level before. But there was another mission, Dominican mission, headed by Askelin, an Italian guy, and accompanied by Simon of St. Quentin. And this one went into the Middle East. They went through the Crusader territories and got to Armenia. And this mission went disastrously because the Dominican friars refused to bow down to Baiju Noyan, who was the commander at that time, Mongol commander of the whole Middle East conquest. And they said, no, it's against our religion to bow down to and plus they didn't want the optics of it. They knew that if they bowed down, the Mongols would use this as propaganda, sort of, and say, look, the Pope's emissaries bowed down to us. So they completely refused, and the Mongols threatened, they debated executing the Dominican mission, and for weeks they were contemplating killing them, and they just left them sitting there in a tent. They couldn't meet Baiju face to face, but finally they decided not to. And it seems, if the story is true, the reason these Dominicans weren't executed was because the wife of Baiju Noyan intervened and said, if you kill them, no one's going to visit you anymore and bring gifts, because they're all going to know you're a monster. And then she was seconded by his host. He had a guy in his camp who took care of foreign emissaries, and he said, remember last time you ordered me to kill an emissary for disrespecting you? He goes, remember how angry the great Khan was about that? So I'm not going to do it this time. I'm not getting in trouble. I'm just going to flee to Mongolia and tell on you and convict you of this crime. So they managed to stop the execution of the emissaries, but it was really close. And I think those guys were lucky to escape alive from the Mongol camp. So that one didn't go well because they didn't even get to meet Baiju face to face. And then there was a fourth mission, fourth papal mission, and it also went to the Middle East and had some success. But unfortunately, the good detailed record of that mission didn't survive. We only know a little bit from Louis the Ninth's friend, Jean V. He wrote a little bit about this mission by a friar Andrew. And there's one or two other sources that record little fragments of it, but we don't know very.
What was the impact of the Mongol invasion regarding the formation of modern-day Romania? Because at that time, of course, Romania didn't exist in present borders and with the present name.
Actually, this is one of the most fascinating questions of Eastern European history, because this might be a case where the Mongols really made a huge difference on history. I mean, they made a big impact everywhere, but Romania, like you said, didn't exist.
Exactly.
But what happened was Transylvania had always been part of Hungary, the Kingdom of Hungary.
Absolutely.
For centuries. And then beyond those Carpathian Mountains, this was just a dangerous this was too vulnerable to nomads to really be settled by settlers from Hungary or something. But the Hungarian kingdom had exercised as kind of authority beyond the Carpathian Mountains. What they just called it Cumania.
Yeah.
And this is the area of Wallachia and Moldavia.
Yeah.
But when the Mongols came in, they, of course, almost destroyed the Hungarian kingdom. And so that area beyond the Carpathian Mountains just was totally abandoned by the Hungarians because it was just too dangerous. It's now Mongol territory. And out of that political situation where you have a sort of Mongol loosely run place, like controlled by Nogai. Out of that, the states of Moldavia and Wallachia developed, and they were able to slowly exert their independence over the early 1300s. Late 1200s, early 1300s, they start to really crystallize as independent states. And of course, the Hungarians would have liked to exert control over that. They didn't just want to leave that alone, but they were too nervous about the Mongols. And the Mongols themselves were just sort of letting things happen in their own, backyard. And so these states gradually were able to survive in this awkward no man's land between the Golden Horde and Hungary. And when the Hungarians finally realized that Wallachia was becoming really strong, and they just wanted to shut it down and destroy it before it got too powerful. They invaded the Carpathian Mountain Pass, and at this Battle of Posada in, I think, 1330, I think a Duke of Wallachia, he wasn't really a king, Mircea cel Batran, defeated them quite badly, defeated the Hungarians. And with that victory, he really consolidated the state of Wallachia, which is the southern, half of Romania today, outside of Transylvania. But then in the 13 or 1400s, Moldavia also was able to become such a strong little principality that the Hungarians again could not eliminate it. The Golden Horde's power was waning in the west. So both of these states kind of were closely related. They were tied by this sort of Latin language. But interestingly, Romania is very strange because it does have this Romance language. But if you look at the letters of 1400s ruler of Wallachia, like Vlad the Impaler, he writes in basically Slavonic. So he definitely knew Slavonic.
They Latinized.
So I don't know.
They Latinized their language in 19th century. But of course, I don't believe in theory of some of those autochthonous historians who believe that Romanians or Wallachians are originally Serbs. This is another fairy tale, and nations in that area tend to have all kinds of charlatans and all kinds of pseudo-historians who come with the craziest theories that you can imagine. For instance, in my region, in the Middle East, we don't have this type of historians and pseudo-historians because you don't have to fabricate the ancient past of civilizations in the Fertile Crescent and the Middle East in general. You don't have to create pseudo-history, or you don't have to create cities and civilizations that are from 8 millennia BC, because they existed. You had urban centers in that period, and you don't have to make up things. You don't have to create fairy tales. But in Eastern Europe, they tend to exaggerate, and they tend to connect modern day nations with ancient civilizations. And this is the case in Bulgaria, in Serbia, Albania, and probably in Romania, because I know some nutcases who come with the theory that all Balkan nations are originally Romanians. Even Nikola Tesla, the well-known
there is the material
inventor,
culture
is Romanian according to these people.
Well, when I went to Romania, what shocked me was so Romania obviously came along a little bit late.
Yeah.
A distinct Romanian principality,
Absolutely.
like Wallachia and Moldavia. Yeah. They came along late, and they have these ties to Cumania and the Cumans and the Mongol Golden Horde. But in the 1800s and early 1900s, Romanians were ashamed of that connection. They didn't want to be tied to the Tatars and the Cumans. They distanced themselves from this. But the truth is, looking at it objectively as an outsider, there is a really good case that the Golden Horde was essential to the formation of the Romanian state. Like I said, because it kept Hungary at bay long enough for this country to form. But their material culture, if you go to the old ruins of like 1300s Romania, which are there, their gravestones, for instance, they're all written in Slavonic. And as a non-expert on Romania, I just thought that was weird. I was like, wait a sec, shouldn't this all be in Romanian? Like, but no, their gravestones, their the letters of Vlad the Impaler. He seems most comfortable actually writing in a Slavonic language.
Of course.
So that surprised me. Like he also knew Latin though. If he wrote to the burghers of Transylvania, Brasov and places, like he wrote in Latin. Yeah. So he knew that one too. But I almost felt like it seems like this. Why am I seeing so much Slavonic writing in Romania? That just confused me in this like formative period of its history.
Absolutely, because you have interconnectedness and cultural exchange between all these groups. So they influence each other. Even in Hungarian language, which is totally different from Slavonic languages, you have lots of words that are common. Like the word for cat or bear is the same in Hungarian and Slavic languages, although Hungarian is isolated from its neighbors. Anyway, if you want to add something about the formation of Romania, please go ahead. If not, we can stop here.
Well, I'll just say one short thing that Romania is definitely a product as a state, as a distinct state. It really is a product of this Mongol Empire. And so we can see, and the Golden Horde especially, And it's not. It's an issue now that I think they would maybe be proud of.
Of course.
So because attitudes towards the Mongols and the Tatars have changed in the last 100 years, 200 years. And so I think they can, without controversy, without political rancor, without bizarre conspiracy notions, they can just calmly look at this issue and see that their own heritage is political heritage is so closely tied to the Mongol Empire. So it's just another country in that region that really its development is very closely tied to these events.
Thank you one more time. We're going to continue discussing topics related to Mongols. We have the whole list of themes that we can tackle. Maybe I can come with some new ideas and we can brainstorm them and prepare other conversations. I wish you all the best in the coming weeks. It's going to be interesting in September, October. I'm also going to have lots of assignments and lots of tasks to do at my work, and I'm looking forward to fulfilling some of these objectives, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks a lot. See you next time.
See you next time. Take care. Bye.
Bye.